I call to order the July 30th, 2019 meeting of the Glendale City Council. May we have the roll call?
Councilmember Agajanian.
Present.
Devine.
Here.
Garpetian. Quintero.
Here.
Mayor Najarian.
Here. Will you read the closed session items, please?
1A, conference with labor negotiators. The city designated negotiators attending the closed session are Yasmin Beers, Rubik Galanian, Mike Garcia, Jillian Van Meiden, Matt Doyle, Carl Provolitis, Tim Feely, and Michelle Flynn. The name of the employee organization is Glendale Police Officers Association. B, Public Employee Appointment, Director of Finance.
Ms. Van Meiden, do you anticipate reporting out?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we expect to report out on item 1B.
Okay. Due to the time sensitivity of this matter, we are going to take closed session at this time and return and commence with our special city council meeting. So we will recess the regular Glendale City Council meeting at this time to close session. Good afternoon again. I call to order the special meeting of the Glendale City Council for July 30th, 2019. May we have roll call?
Councilmember Agajanian.
Present.
Devine.
Here.
Garpetian. Quintero.
Here.
Mayor Najarian.
Here. May we have your report?
The agenda for the July 30th, 2019 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on Thursday, July 25th, 2019 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
And what's the first item?
Director of Community Development regarding Glendale Burbank Regional Streetcar Feasibility Study Progress Update. 1A, motion to note and file the status report.
Ms. Beers.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, we're going to go directly to Mr. Calvert, who has a PowerPoint presentation. And after this item, we do have a presentation related to an award that we've received. So right after this item, we'll do that in case staff needs to get back to their offices. So we'll start with this one first.
Good afternoon, Mayor Najarian and the council members. We are here this afternoon to provide an update on the streetcar. Last time we were here was in March of this year, and we provided two alternatives for the routes to begin discussion on how that streetcar could be integrated into downtown Glendale. In between that time, we have conducted a number of measures for public engagement. We have worked on refinement of these routes. We've worked on the refinement of the location of the stops. This afternoon, we will also be talking about the ridership potential of the route and potential cost. We're also looking at the impacts to parking. If you recall from some of these route alternatives, it would require the conversion of some of the angle parking on Brand into parallel parking. So there would be some implication to that, as well as the stations themselves would have to be in locations where parking is typically located. So we have some assumptions on what that impact would be along the routes. Between March and today, we have begun some significant public engagement. We started by reaching out to the Chamber of Commerce. We reached out to Downtown Glendale Association. We also went to our friends at Go Glendale and all of their members to discuss the opportunities with the streetcar. We also launched a project website, though. This was really exciting to work on. We had the assistance of Kevork and Eliza in the city manager's office to get that designed and launched. Savannah and Sandra in our economic development division helped us work on the surveys and the polls to help get feedback from the residents. And thus far, it's been a really, really great success, and it's providing an excellent opportunity for us to show to the public what this project could potentially hold for downtown. This is just a sample from the website itself. The website is GlendaleStreetcar.com. This includes history of streetcars in Glendale, including the old red cars. So there's a page dedicated to those lines that used to run through the city. There's examples from other cities such as Portland and Seattle and Atlanta and Kansas City. And then we also provide the graphics that represent the alternatives for the routes and some of the potential renderings of what these stations and the streetcars could look like. As part of that, we created a survey. And with this survey, we wanted to better understand what the public thought of the streetcar, how they would use the streetcar, maybe where they were coming from, where they would go to, and just overall take the temperature of the public and see what their feeling was towards it. As of last Friday, we had 109 responses. That number has gone up. We didn't get a chance to compile those numbers prior to this afternoon's meeting, but the website has gained significant traction. The first question we asked was where people were coming from and how they were associated with Glendale, whether or not they lived here, they worked here, they visited. They were allowed to choose multiples in the event that someone lives and works here, but a majority of our respondents did live in Glendale. A majority of them did not work or live in downtown Glendale, which actually provided some interesting results in terms of the support of the streetcar and how they would use it. We also asked the question, how do they currently get to downtown Glendale? And nearly 80% of them responded that they typically drive. So this represents a great opportunity for us to provide another alternative for users to arrive downtown. Walking was the second most frequent, just a shade under 50%. And then we had just under 10% respondents in bicycle and a little over 10 for transit. The important question we asked was, do they support the streetcar? And nearly 90% of respondents have voiced their favoritism towards the streetcar. We've also left open fields for comments, and we could distribute those comments at a later date to council if they'd like to read them. But there was a lot of favoritism towards this project. They were very excited. They were excited to see another transit opportunity. They were excited to see another way to connect to downtown, connect to Los Angeles as well. How they would use the streetcar, we gave them 3 prompts. We asked if they would essentially come to downtown to access dining, shopping, and entertaining. Would they commute to work? Would they connect to Los Angeles and Union Station? And then there was the option to write in how they would also use it as well. Majority said they really wanted to use this to access shopping, dining, and entertainment downtown, and connecting to Los Angeles was the second most popular answer. Some of the write-ins and the most frequent write-in that we saw were errands. People wanted to use it to go to the doctor, to go pick up things from the store. So there is a utilitarian purpose to this as well to many of the respondents. And being that this project would have a second phase potentially that would connect to Burbank, we also asked the question, do you support connecting to Burbank? And that response was over 80% as well. I believe it was around 82, 83%. And then we asked the question, how likely were they likely to use the streetcar? Nearly 70% said very likely. Almost 30 said very or somewhat likely, which again, this is also very positive because you saw that almost 90% of respondents said they supported the streetcar, but even if they're not going to use it, they are still in support of this and in support of seeing this in downtown. So just to recap some of the alternatives, the first is the loop alternative, and this is the one that starts at the Larry's Area Transportation Center. It moves north and south on Central Avenue until it gets to Maple excuse me, that's the second alternative. This one would continue north on Central all the way to Stocker. And then it would turn and come south on Brand. So you would just have one track on Central and one on Brand north of Maple. It would run bi-directional south of Maple down to the Larry's Area Transportation Center. You can see that red line represents the potential BRT route. There would be some overlap with this. We do assume that we can operate both the BRT and the streetcar within the same right-of-way. There's still more work we need to do as part of this feasibility study to address any of those challenges or opportunities that exist, but there's ample opportunity to operate both of these in the same right-of-way. We've also refined some of the station locations. You can see the intersections of where all of these would rest. Again, starting at the transportation center and going all the way north, you see that station at Stocker, and this is where the train would take a turn and then come south on Brand and then reconnect to Central down to the transit center. Some of the street sections, we've been working on refining this and kind of the impacts to that right-of-way. The top image there represents the existing, the bottom is the proposed. You can see the streetcar on this section of Brand is running southbound curbside on the left side of that image. In this case, we're actually able to preserve all dedicated car travel lanes. You would just have 3 of them on the northbound side. In the existing configuration, there's 3 on the south, 2 on the north. We would move 1 over to the north side. This would also require the parking that is angled right now would need to be converted to parallel parking though. Section through Central, you can see this is kind of that northern portion of Central. Once you get above Broadway, you can see the bike lanes in north and southbound sections. In this case, one of the lanes would have to move to streetcar and travel lanes for automobile. Remember that none of the streetcar lanes are dedicated just to streetcar. They would share those with automobiles as well. One thing in this section that we would have a potential conflict in is because these stations would sit in the parking. the existing parking areas, is our bike lane is actually on the outside of the parking lanes on Central. But this actually presents an opportunity, as you can see in that red arrow, that we could potentially move this bike lane internal to the car parking. And this is actually a positive for us. This is actually a safer way to have a bike lane. Essentially, it's protected and buffered by the parked cars, but this allows those parking areas to be the locations for the stations. And many studies have shown that when you can protect a bike lane, whether it's by curbs, planters, parked cars, ridership tends to go significantly higher because it feels much safer. So this is one of those opportunities where we have overlapping modes, overlapping infrastructure changes that we could also accommodate for cyclists.
Excuse,
Yes, Mr. Agajanian.
when you say makes it safer, for who?
For the cyclist.
How about the public?
In general, that lane would be separated, it's already separated from pedestrians, so we don't have cyclists riding on the sidewalks. But right now, you have the sidewalk, and then you have parking, and then you have the bike lane. So those bicyclists are exposed to the drivers that are moving along Central. If that bike lane moves inside the parked cars, that means they no longer have that exposure to cars that are passing by, cars that may accidentally weave into that bicycle lane. And this is just a rendering at looking north at Central and Laurel of what that could look like. This is the bi-directional portion south of Maple before it continues on to Central as a one-way. Some of the parking impacts. This first portion, looking at Central, this would result in a loss of 50 to 55 parallel parking spaces along this portion. We don't have a percentage on this one because we need to go out and do a manual count of the parking spaces. Most of the spaces aren't striped, so we need to go out there and take a look at the number of meters that are there and then the overall linear feet, how many parking spaces are there. But as we continue to refine this, we'd know the percentage of spaces lost along Central. On Brand, again, converting that parking from angle to parallel, that alone results in about a 30% loss in parking spaces. And then there's an additional 20 to 25 that would be lost to the actual station platforms that would be located within that parking. And the reason why you have that loss from the angle to the parallel is because the angle parking is sitting narrower right now than if you were to move to parallel. So maybe you have a 10-foot width for the angle parking. Now you have to go to 20 for the parallel. For example, we counted 467 spaces along Brand. If you take the 30% loss because of the change in dimensions, plus the 20 to 25 spaces lost for the stations themselves, that would bring that down to about 280, 290 parking spaces along Brand. And that would have to occur regardless of the alternative, even if we'd only do the one-way, because as you saw in that street section example on the one-way, we would still be preserving one of the travel lanes. So on both sides of the street, we would need to convert to parallel parking in that case. And we'll have a summary slide that compares the two alternatives and that kind of overall impact of parking. Ridership and cost on this loop alternative, we'd be looking at 1,400 to 3,800 riders per day. Towards the end, we'll show how that compares to some other examples and other streetcars around the country. Construction cost is going to be the same for either of these alternatives. It's the same mileage of tracks. It's the same number of stations. So it's 250 to 300 million. Operations also the same for both alternatives, $4 to $5 million per year. That second alternative, this is the bi-directional, which would run from the transportation center up to Maple. Bi-directional, north and south would be on Central. It would cut across Maple to Brand and then run north-south on Brand. So both north and southbound would be on Brand. The other alternative showed it one on Central, one on Brand. This one does have the impact that it's capturing the largest potential audience. These are the most number of pedestrians. These are the most number of transit users that are already in this area. But it does obviously cause some disruption, especially during construction periods for this project because it's all focused on one street instead of split between two. The station locations, as you can see, most of these are the same. We are just lacking the stations on Central since we're two-way on one street. The section, this one a little bit similar. You can see both streetcars running north-south on Brand. We are able to preserve 4 total lanes for auto travel only in this section. You do see that parking is converted again from angled to parallel. That's something that would have to happen regardless of the number of tracks that would occur on the street. We need that because of those stations.
So there would be parallel parking on both sides of Brand?
There are some locations where it's only on one side, especially as you move south towards Colorado. There, around the Americana, you only have some parking on the right side going northbound. As you move further north, you see that more even distribution on both sides. Central, this is looking towards the southern portion of the route, going towards the transportation center. In this case, we would be able to keep our parallel parking, just lose the spaces where the stations would actually land. You see 2 of those travel lanes are being converted to streetcar and travel lanes for cars. Again, they're shared, and we still have a center turn lane. So not too many major impacts here. It's just converting existing travel lanes to share both streetcar and auto. Parking impacts on the southern portion of the route along Central, there would be a loss of 20 to 25 parallel parking spaces. On Brand, again, as I explained, you'd lose that 30% to parallel, then you would lose more for the actual stations because you have more stations along Brand. You have them on both sides of the street in this case, and just one, so it'd be 40 to 50 spaces just for the stations alone. Ridership, this would be a little bit higher. This would be about 1,500 to 4,000 per day. This is because there's more commercial activity on this street. There are just more users in general. There are more existing transit users that are there. As I mentioned, construction costs the same at 250 to 300 million, and operations costs 4 to 5 million per year, also the same. And again, as we move through this feasibility study, which we anticipate to wrap up this winter, those numbers will become more and more refined as we move through. The alternative summary, alternative 1, the loop, alternative 2, the bidirectional, both 2.88 miles. They both include 16 stations. Again, construction and maintenance costs are the same. The ridership, a little bit higher, and you can see why there. The commercial square footage along the alignment, there's 6.2 million square feet on alternative 1. There's 8.1 million square feet on alternative 2. And that's just that concentration of retail and businesses that are up and down Brand. We have more residential now that occupies Central. So there's just more of that commercial activity. Overall parking spaces, while alternative 2 loses more for stations, combined more parking spaces are lost on alternative 1, the loop option, because more of those spaces are coming out of both Central and Brand. That 70 to 80 and that 60 to 75, that does not include the 30% that would need to convert to parallel parking from angled, and that's because we need to figure out exactly where that station would go, how many parking spaces would that impact in general. So average ridership, we looked at a number of cities, and if we go back to our initial report from the feasibility, the launch of this project, we were looking at streetcars around the country, why this might be a good fit for us. Was the population density and the employment density high enough? It was determined that it was. We pulled some of those cities out of that report and took a look at what their ridership looks like. And you can see this is a pretty broad range. We have cities, Cincinnati, Atlanta, Oklahoma City, Tucson. There's 2 in Seattle, 1 in Tampa, Milwaukee, DC, and Kansas City. And these range anywhere from about 800 riders per day all the way up to almost 6,000. And in some cases, Kansas City has really become this gold standard for the streetcar, and in some cases, they achieve 7,500 riders per day on average. And that really speaks to why our route is so significant and why this could be very beneficial for us, is that runs through the heart of employment centers, residential density, things like that. On the flip side of that, you have Atlanta, which is down towards the bottom. Atlanta uses a loop option. Granted, they had to do that by force because they did not have the right-of-way width to accommodate a bidirectional, but they also chose to not run that route through the most dense locations. It connects to downtown, but then it connects to 2 anchored tourist destinations. So the route didn't serve people who actually really needed it, but also that loop route was pretty inefficient for them, and their ridership has dropped down.
I'm sorry, I was asking Mayor Najarian a question. What city was that?
Atlanta was the
Atlanta.
latest one I was mentioning. So our current range, which right now is pretty wide, we do need to narrow that down. And through that, we'll be doing that with what we call a STOPS model. This is something that the Federal Transportation Administration requires for us to move on to the environmental impact study, other work that we need to do. And that's a much more refined study that looks at current development, potential development, and it will give us a much more focused number. But either way, we do fall right in there with some of those streetcars that are performing very well with the current estimates. And that is because we are running this through, right through the heart of our city, right through the employment center, right where everybody lives, right in the heart of the commercial activity. So we would expect this to perform very well. We have not gotten as far as fares, and during some of the public engagement, we were asked this question, what would the fare look like? That's something we need to focus a little bit more in on. Most operate somewhere between $1.50 and $2 per trip. In that instance, that will cover about half of our operations and maintenance, so that's something to kind of be aware of as we're moving forward with this study. How do we potentially fill that gap? How does fare potentially change that? One thing we'd also mention that most of these streetcars within their first year of operation actually ran the streetcar for free. And that was because they were really trying to build that reliance on it, that dependence on it, let it integrate into the transportation system, and then they put the fare on top of it. In some cases, it had no impact to ridership. Kansas City, Seattle, Washington, they continue to grow. In the cases of Cincinnati and Atlanta, they did see their ridership go down once the fare kicked in. So that's something that we'll continue to study, and that will be part of that final feasibility report when we bring back in the fall and winter. As I mentioned, the next steps, really looking at that ridership forecast so that we can get an understanding of what kind of revenue this could bring in, how many people would actually use it. We do need to continue with traffic analysis. What are the impacts at intersections, especially as we get across 134? That one of the disadvantages of the bidirectional option is that you have both sides of 134 that you're impacting because both north and southbound are crossing over that. So understanding what those impacts are. As you're aware, we're also currently doing the pre-engineering study for Space 134, which is really looking at the ramps predominantly. So we'll be able to extract information from there and correlate it with this work here. We also need to look at a block-by-block analysis. We know there are some utilities along Central that could be impacted. We don't expect it to be a major impact. We don't expect to have to move utilities, but just something that we want to be aware of and make sure that we're not going to run into any issues later on. And then looking at project financing options. Overall, we expect to have the feasibility study, the final feasibility study prepared and delivered to council this fall or winter, and that will answer many more of those questions that you see up there now. So otherwise, that concludes the presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
I have a speaker from the public, and then we can come back to council. Greg Astorian.
Thank you, Mayor Najarian. My name is Greg Astorian. I have a number of questions for your consideration, more so than any comments, but I will use a visual to really go through them. So as your consultant has said or has shown, one of the alternatives, alternative number one, is the loop system, and you also have an alternative number two that is going to pack Brand Boulevard. I put these two together, and then I put the already existing infrastructure system that we have that services the same area, mainly the B line. And what I wanted to do is for you to see the visual similarities of the corridor that the B line serves. This is B line number one. It has 32 stops as opposed to 16 on each one of the alternatives for the streetcar. And of course, this one is B line number two, same number of stops, 32 stops. The question, the overarching question, Mr. Mayor, is what is it, what's the goal with the streetcar, and is it possible that that goal could be achieved with an existing B-line system in the corridor? I don't know the answer, but that's one of the questions that I would definitely look at. And here's the reason. Your consultant has said that it's going to cost about $250, $300 million each one of these options, right? Where we have an initial cost of zero for the B-line, obviously because it's an existing system. What is it, or how much money do we need to spend on the B-line to get it to do exactly what the streetcar is supposed to do? Well, your initial, your transit study or transit survey study that was presented to your transportation parking last week suggests somewhere close to, in the near to midterm, about $10 million. And that includes buying 8 buses for the entire city of Glendale. I will go on the limb and say that if you were to improve on the B line that serves the same corridor, we will be a whole lot less than $8 million or $10 million. Especially when we're thinking about or considering an operational cost of about $5 million approximately. And that holds true for the second option too. All I'm suggesting is a reference, a cross, like an alternative use, to see how much of the services that we are looking for we're going to be able to pack on the B line. Now, we know that we are being told that your ridership would be anywhere between 1,400 to 3,800. The upper level of this threshold is about 3,800 or 3,900 for the alternative number 2. But interestingly, the actual ridership for downtown on these 2 loops is about 1,000 people. I mean, I would say that estimating 3,800 or 4,000 riders, it's a bold projection, and I don't know what it's based on, but overall, I think it would serve the city of Glendale well if we can get some comparison and contrast and to see if the goals that we want to achieve through the streetcar can be achieved through the B line. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Right on the button, Mr. Historian. Okay. This is a receive and file, essentially, but let's have it open up to council for thoughts. What routes do you prefer? What do you think the future should be? Ms. Devine, let me go to you first.
All right. According to the responses that you've gotten, the bi-directional is the more popular of the two? You might understand that?
So the website had a one-question poll asking which the preference was, and right now it's an even 50-50 split for the 2 of them. Granted, we do have a limited amount of information. As we start to add more and more on, people would understand the greater impacts, and those are questions that we'll continue to ask the public through engagement.
But the thinking is that the bi-directional is easier to use. Makes it easier for...
It's more intuitive, correct?
Intuitive. Okay, and the biggest question, same cost for both concepts, but the biggest issue, of course, is the protecting the median, the trees. So in both of these scenarios, the median, trees and landscaping, greenery, green space is protected.
Correct. All the streetcars run curbside.
So that will eliminate a lot of worry out there. I know people are already concerned about, cutting down all those trees and that sort of thing. So I think it sounds very exciting. It's interesting. I especially like the fact that we can get it all the way to Burbank. That would be amazing. And I think that's probably a goal that we should try to achieve. And I think that's, again, location is important, as we see in Atlanta, right? You have to do the right research to put this in the right location so that it's well used, and is important to the residents of our community. Okay, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Agajanian?
I have one issue. You said the cost of having this system will be $250 million to $300 million. Where do we get the money from? Is there money somewhere that we can reach?
That's actually part of the next phase of this work, is to identify what are some of the financing options. There are federal grants. There could be state opportunities. There are many. I mean, there are even opportunities for private partnerships to engage in some of these improvements. That's something that we'll identify as this next round and bring those options to council so that you can review them.
But we're going to look for entire money, or we have to pay for some of the expenses?
It's a little early to tell on that right now. We'd have to see what opportunities are out there.
What we have in our mind, you're going forward. I want to see if you're going to have this mindset of, so if we will get the grant for $250 to $300 million, we're going to go forward. Otherwise, we are not going to do it. That's what I want to understand.
One of the important points is, and we may very well get all of it grant funded. Until we have this viability study, we can't even apply for those grants. So it's a step by step. If the council said we don't want to put any money into this at all, we would look for ways to find grants. We'll find a way to get as much as we can financed, and then the council can make a decision. But as Bradley said, There are opportunities anywhere from Measure M money. There are streetcar money in Measure M that could be competed for. The state will no doubt have additional monies as the years roll forward. We could do things like a public-private partnership, P3, where it's a financing mechanism. Or you could go all the way to the other extreme where you have private industry take this, build it, and run it for us. So those will all be teased out as we take this study forward.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And I think the goal obviously is to reduce or eliminate as much as we can, but that STOPS model that I reference is very important for us to be able to identify that, because that is what gives us essentially the justification to say this is a successful project, and now we would like to be eligible and have the opportunity for federal grants or state opportunities. And that's the next phase of the work.
The only thing was bothering me, as much as money is very vague. It's very dangerous to look for as much as money. We have to have some limitation as to where we are going.
Sure, and once we finish this and we figure out what the cost is, and we look out there, if we say, gee, there's only grants for a quarter of this, come back to the council says, no, you know, that's too big for us, that's more than we want to chew. Or conversely, we find grant money and the council says, you know, we've got to put in X million dollars. That's worth it for us to do. We want to see that. But again, we can't give you that information that you can make an informed decision until we finish the study.
Thank you. One more issue I have, sorry. I have problem with the survey which we have conducted. 109 people, that's like 0.05% of population if you consider the kids and elderly. That's not a survey. This is like, I'm saying 0.05% of population, if you consider the kids, of course. That's too small. I think we have to redo this to make big, announce or do something. I mean, talk about it, make a big issue. We have to have at least like 5,000 people to be participated in this. If I'm not 5,000, even if it's not that big a number, but at least 109. We can't rely on 109 people to decide for 250 million, something that will cost the city and the other 200,000 people, 250 million to $300 million. Even if we pay 10% of it, that's going to be too much money for others. So we have to redo this or do some other way to reach to the public and ask their opinion. Thank you.
The survey is an ongoing one. We didn't mention this earlier. This just launched a couple weeks ago. We are continuing to push that out through different channels to continue to build that momentum. We plan to continue to leave this up there and to continue pushing that during other public engagement events to continue to drive those numbers up. But it's only about 2 weeks old, 2.5 weeks at this point.
So this is open online
Correct.
survey?
It's still open. We're still pushing it through different social media channels.
Maybe I announce on my program, maybe I can help.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Mr. Quintero.
Okay, well, I'm very happy to receive the report, and as one of the people concerned with the trees on Brand, I'm happy that that beautiful landscaping will stay. So I'm all for it. My only concern is that and that's why the ridership, I think, is so low, projected ridership. I mean, basically, we then get to the transportation center. The transportation center is horribly placed. It's not near any population center. So that means you now have to wait for the heavy rail that's going to take you to downtown LA, or if you're heading north, somewhere else. If you're heading north, then, you know, it's a comfortable place to be because you're off to distant locations, whether it's Ventura or Antelope Valley or wherever you're going. If you're headed south, there's just not much of an incentive. So my goal for many years is to have this type of system or something similar go all the way to Union Station. Union Station is where you make the connection to the rest of Southern California, or at least the LA region, whether you're going to the downtown or not. From Union Station, you can take the blue line to Long Beach, the green line to Pasadena and the East San Gabriel Valley, or you can go to Santa Monica now. Eventually, you'll be able to get to LAX. So really, you're getting on a streetcar, getting on a light rail car, changing once in a central location, and then going to wherever you want to go. That's what Glendale needs, and that's what Glendale deserves. Every other region in Southern California has got light rail, and so, you know, I'm for this, for sure. But I think we need to continue to work, and I know Mr. Najarian has worked on it for years. We need to continue to work to connect to Union Station. That means going through Atwater, Cypress Park, however we get down to Union Station. Remember, there's lots of existing light rail lines that were there for 100 years. Glendale was one of the last locations where light rail, the old red cars, ran all the way to pretty much where it would stop here north of the freeway. So that's really what we need to push, and I'd love to somehow, maybe it's too late, I would have loved to have had this extended so that we could study some alternatives to get us to Union Station. Now, in terms of the line itself for the cars, so you saw the overhead on the slides, but in Asia, and I've ridden on them, and also in Europe, they now have new lines, and you know, basically they're being built by all of the manufacturers. And what they do is, I'll describe it with my hands, I can't remember what it's called, regenerative energy maybe, whatever it is, they basically charge at the station. So you don't have an overhead. They charge. Inductive, right, an inductive charge.
Like your cell phone. Like your
Right,
cell
like your
phone,
cell
you
phone. That's
place it
right.
on your little charger.
That's right. It's not a hot rail. It's actually, you charge it at the station. You go on to the next station while people are getting in and out, and you charge and charge and charge. It's an established technology. Like I say, I rode it in Asia a couple of times. And you can barely tell it's there in terms of the whole visual. There's just no overhead. So you've got these really nice stations. Some of the stations I saw actually didn't just have benches. They had, you know, sort of tables and, you know, for people to maybe have a bite or read a book or whatever. Anyway, I think that's something we absolutely have to look at. And my feeling would be that perhaps some of these same manufacturers, whether they're German, Japanese, Chinese, whoever they are, some of these same manufacturers, in terms of a P3, a public-private partnership, they must think, wow, this would be a great demonstration project in Southern California. Who knows? Maybe financially we can work something out so that we lower the cost. But it's definitely worth you know, sort of studying it. And then unfortunately, Ms. Najarian just informed me Measure M money won't be available, but hopefully through federal grants and P3s, et cetera. Then to Mr. Astorian's comment, so the current B line is basically running along this route, correct?
The loop alternative, correct.
Yeah. Is it well marked? I mean, does it clearly say Transportation Center, downtown Glendale? I mean, I just wonder if people are really aware that this same loop is happening.
You know, Mr. Quintero, for the riders that use it, they know it.
They know, yeah.
And each of them, they share with MTA. Many of the stops they share with MTA, so there's signage for both. What we want to look at in our study, and as we go forward, is really the headways. We think we can get shorter headways with the streetcar than we can with the B line. And that's one of the issues that we're studying with Metro. and MetroLink is how do we get more service, shorter headways, and then that might allow you to run a more efficient service by streetcar as opposed to bus. Because right now, we don't have the headways where people in the 500, 600, 800 block of North Brand say, I've got time to get on a beeline to get down to the Americana, the Galleria, South Brand. So those are all things that we'll look at.
I didn't get a chance to read it, but there's an article in today's paper about the high-speed rail and how they may be moving money to.
There are some very wise people quoted in that.
Very, very wise people
I gotta read it. I'll read it as
who
soon
may
as I
be in a
get to the
position
office.
to take some of that money and move
No
it to
kidding.
Glendale
Right.
or somewhere.
That sounds fantastic.
But in the article, Mr. Quintero, I'm glad you brought that up because there are some wise people talking in there. The idea is maybe to shift some of the funding for the high-speed rail to more dense areas where there are higher ridership. And that may mean eventually some funding for projects like this or for the project we're working on with Metro.
Right, and look, overall, I mean, I don't have anything against heavy rail. It works fine, but obviously it works way better for longer distances than what we're talking about here. But once again, I just hope that we, in a fairly small amount of time, we're able to get to Union Station, because that's definitely becoming the hub for transportation throughout the region. It's going to be great for Glendale people. I can see coming to Glendale to shop or do whatever and then getting back on. And just like from Pasadena, a few months ago, I went to Highland Park to a restaurant there that happened to be, it was during the week, happened to be next to the station. I was totally stunned. At almost 10 o'clock or 10:30 at night, the station was packed. In the middle of the week, people had gone to Highland Park and done whatever, had dinner, et cetera, and were getting ready to go somewhere. I don't know if they were going north or south, so hopefully that'll be us one of these days.
And
I just wanted to follow up on the beeline question that Mr. Astor. If we eventually get a streetcar, if that happens, then we can always reroute the beeline, can't we? And we can use it in the canyons and other places. It doesn't have to necessarily take that same route. Those buses we can move anywhere, correct?
Sure, and the story is not complete. Public Works and Catherine Engel right now is working with Metro, and they're doing a larger study. And where's the demand for bus? So all of that information will be coming back and be part of this plan for downtown transit.
Thank you for the presentation. This is something that I learned at Metro, is that even though funding may seem very remote and unobtainable, it's always best to have a project in the planning stages or past the planning stages on the shelf ready to go, because you never know when funding is going to appear. And if you say, wait a minute, let me do a study on it, someone else is going to be there grabbing it. Before you got appointed, Mr. Quintero, back in, was it May or June, we did have a discussion on a study that I had asked for at Metro between transit between Union Station, Glendale, and Burbank Airport. So we got several different options, and I think Bradley presented it, or someone presented it.
Metro did.
Metro was here. And so we had the full range of a dedicated light rail system all the way to increased MetroLink service. The light rail system, although is probably the best and most attractive, had a price tag of about $5 billion, so it was a little bit expensive. What we eventually, at Metro, what we just passed by resolution, by motion last Thursday, was a increased MetroLink service, which would run every 30 minutes from LA Union Station, with added stations one at LA River Park, and one at Sonora. And then it would go on to Burbank. The funding for that was rather obscure. We never thought we would have any money for that, but again, that's an example of having done the planning on it. And the issue that you talked about today is an effort by the High-Speed Rail Authority to really examine whether their money is best spent on that central corridor where there isn't much ridership, I would suspect, and distribute that to the bookends, the San Francisco and south, and in our area from Anaheim to Burbank. So that funding, potentially there's $5 billion of funding which could come through. Metrolink is ready to use that in upgrades to the system where this 30-minute headway on the trains may very well be a reality in the near future. So we'll see how that all works out. On this particular streetcar, there's all sorts of different funding, and I think Bradley and Phil touched on it. There is New Starts money from the federal government, which is a grant funding. There are perhaps cost savings on the B line in the operations. We get local return money through Measure M and Measure R, and we have a pot of money for regional equity on Measure R, which is mainly, I think, earmarked for highway improvements, but as long as it has some nexus to the highway, there's some flexibility in getting that. We have talked about having a traffic impact fee on new developments in the city. Some of that money could go there. And the one funding source that really hasn't matured yet, but everyone looks at it, is the public-private partnerships, where we can either do a design, build, operate a system with one vendor, or we can give certain development rights at our different stops, and they would pay in for those rights. So it's out there. I mean, the future of the funding is a little bit fuzzy, but it could become clear in a short period of time. I think this mode of transit, in response to Mr. Astorian's remarks, is something that is more attractive. People, I think, generally like to get on a rail car or a street car or a trolley in certain circumstances, or even something that looks like a trolley, as we experienced with our Christmas vehicle that has very good ridership. So it's a different type of mode, and if we can connect it to the train station, we can have, hopefully we'll get some robust ridership. But I'm glad we're moving forward. We're not here to make any decisions. I do like the alternative 2, which is the bi-directional on Brand. But let's go forward. Let's continue forward with it as we can flesh out the details on this. I think that puts us in a better position if and when we can get some funding and make this thing a reality. And that's all we're doing today. We're just receiving your report. Any other comments by council? So, and other modes, I mean, there are, BYD, the electric bus maker, is promoting a monorail system. They say it's very inexpensive. I'm not sure how the monorail would work on our street system because you're going to need some sort of elevated platforms. But I guess the point is that the technology, they're thinking outside the box on these technologies. And maybe there'll be something very feasible in the future. So is there a motion to note and file?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Agajanian,
Yes.
Devine,
Yes.
Garpetian, Quintero,
Yes.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Thank you. What's the next item?
Director of Community Development regarding potential revisions to the Glendale Municipal Code Noise Control Ordinance, GMC 8.36, relating to the use of amplified sound equipment A, motion to provide direction to staff regarding potential revisions to the GMC 8.36.
Ms. Beers?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, we are before you this afternoon to seek direction related to the use of amplified sound equipment within the DSP. This was an item that was brought forward by council, and Mr. Calvert will take you through a presentation and seek some direction from council. With that, Mr. Calvert.
So yes, this is in response to a council request, but it's also in response to some of the initiatives that we have going on in downtown Glendale, and that includes the ARTSOC Paseo, recently the DSP amendments. I'm actually going to turn this over to our planner, Cassandra Pruitt, who has put together this afternoon's presentation. And one thing I'd like to remind is that we're not here to change the hours today. We're not here to change the code today. What we're looking for is direction to pursue the ambient noise study, and we are looking for your input on what type of hours and days that you would possibly like to consider extending those noise levels to.
Cassandra Pruitt.
Good afternoon, Mayor Najarian and council members. You've already introduced me, so thank you. And this presentation is regarding potential revisions to the noise control chapter of the Glendale Municipal Code, also known as the Noise Control Ordinance. To provide an overview, staff is bringing this agenda item to you in order to consider potential changes to the amplified sound equipment regulations within the city's noise control ordinance. Currently, the cutoff time for commercial use of such equipment is 10 p.m. This issue has been raised because of an increase in nighttime entertainment activity in downtown Glendale, and whether council wishes to better accommodate those uses that are consistent with the community's vision for the downtown. In this presentation, I will outline the background, issues, and options, and there will be 3 decisions for you to make. The first is whether you would like staff to move forward with hiring a consultant to conduct the further studies and analysis that are necessary to explore changes to the noise ordinance. You would not be deciding on any code changes today. You would just be deciding whether you want staff to look further into the possibility of doing so. Staff would come back later with findings and request further direction at that time. If you decide to move forward with further exploration, the second decision would be which days and times you would like staff to explore for extending the allowed hours of operation of amplified sound equipment. And I will go into the options later in the presentation. The final decision is whether you would like to direct staff to make additional updates to the existing noise ordinance in order to address existing inconsistencies that were identified by staff during review of this code section. I will also describe this in more detail later on. So the issue under discussion has been raised because Glendale's downtown has transformed into an economically vibrant area with an active nightlife. Several efforts were made by the city over the years to encourage this to happen, including years of redevelopment efforts, the 2006 Downtown Specific Plan, and the 2011 adoption of the Art and Entertainment District. Several goals and land use policies in the Downtown Specific Plan encouraged extending the life of downtown into the evenings and weekends to contribute to the vitality of downtown and downtown businesses. 2 districts within the Downtown Specific Plan specifically called for entertainment uses. Those were the Alex Theater District and the Maryland District, which is now the Art and Entertainment District. The vitality of downtown is further supported by your recent visioning of the Downtown Specific Plan and the ARTSOC Paseo. All of these efforts have resulted in a more active nightlife in downtown Glendale. One way that businesses offer entertainment to their patrons is by providing music using amplified sound equipment. The city currently regulates the use of amplified sound equipment in the Noise Control Ordinance, which limits the use of commercial equipment to Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., and the equipment may not be used on Sundays or legal holidays. Many businesses, however, operate past 10 p.m. and until late into the evening. For these businesses, the restrictions on the use of amplified sound equipment act as a restriction on their business operations, which in turn may hinder the ongoing efforts at promoting a vibrant downtown and extending activity into the evenings. At the same time, much of the downtown development that has taken place includes multifamily housing, in some cases located adjacent to these high entertainment areas where amplified sound late into the evening may cause a conflict. The noise ordinance was last updated in 1991, long before this more recent development in downtown. Recognizing that downtown has transformed into a vibrant evening destination within the region, the question has been raised as to whether council may want to explore the potential of extending the allowed hours of amplified sound equipment in order to better accommodate these uses, which are consistent with the visioning of the downtown, but without creating nuisances for nearby residential uses. Staff recommends focusing this discussion on the Alex Theater and Art and Entertainment districts, since the visions for these districts are consistent with nighttime entertainment activity. Because the noise ordinance has many interrelated provisions and is also connected to other city documents, changing it to allow later hours of operation for amplified sound equipment will trigger impacts to other related provisions and documents. The first step in exploring these impacts is to conduct noise studies. The noise studies would test noise levels of amplified sound equipment operating at certain extended times to see how they compare to the existing noise limit standards within the noise ordinance. Staff would need to contract out with an acoustical engineer to conduct the noise studies and do the subsequent analysis. Staff anticipates 3 potential outcomes from conducting these noise studies. The first is if the noise study results show that the use of amplified sound past 10 p.m. actually falls within the existing noise limits in the noise ordinance. If this ends up being the case, staff anticipates less impacts to other code sections. But there will still be some impacts, which staff would need to analyze once we have the results of the noise studies. Staff would return to council at that time with the code and noise study findings and request further direction at that time. The second potential outcome is if the noise studies show that the proposed extended hours will result in noise levels that exceed the existing noise limits in the noise ordinance. If council wanted to move forward with the code change, this would likely result in a more comprehensive code revision effort. With the noise study results, staff would analyze the impacts and return to council with those findings and ask for further direction. The third potential outcome is if the noise studies show the proposed extended hours will result in noise levels that exceed the existing noise limits in the noise ordinance, and further analysis reveals that the impacts would affect the general plan. By state law, municipal code must be consistent with the general plan. So if this were the case and council wanted to move forward with the with the code changes, a general plan amendment would be needed, which would be a significant endeavor. Staff would use the noise study findings to analyze the scope of impacts and again would return to council for further direction. Regardless of which of the 3 noise study outcomes we encounter, the noise ordinance will need to be revised to allow the extended hours, and there will be other related code provisions that are impacted. In order to provide council a heads up on the potential scope of code changes that could be triggered by this effort, staff reviewed the noise ordinance and the noise element of the general plan. Staff identified several provisions and sections that could be affected by extending the hours for amplified sound equipment, which can be categorized into 3 topic areas. The first relates to impacts to the city's general plan noise element. Staff identified 3 parts of the general plan that could be affected, and they all relate to noise levels and the interface between noise from entertainment uses and nearby residences. When the noise studies are conducted, staff will ensure these interfaces between these different uses are studied. And to reiterate, staff would need to conduct the noise studies to further understand exactly what the full scope of impacts will be. And with the results, we would return to council and request further direction. The second category of code studies to be triggered is within the noise ordinance itself. The noise ordinance consists of many interrelated provisions, some of which will be affected if the amplified sound standards are changed. Some sections of the code that need to be analyzed once we have the noise study results are the sections relating to noise levels, the impacts of sound amplifying equipment on nearby sensitive uses, and several other general provisions within the amplified sound section of the noise ordinance. These include general provisions to not create disturbing noise or vibration. Additionally, we could also consider conditioning the use of amplified sound equipment during later hours on the use of noise mitigation techniques. Using mitigation techniques such as sound barrier walls, noise-canceling speakers, or limiting the height and/or direction of the speakers could result in less noise impacts. Another option that could be explored is to limit the number of amplified sound permits that can be issued in any one area in order to limit the cumulative noise impact. Both of these options would be explored and options brought back to council when staff returns with the noise study findings. The third category of code studies to be triggered are additional issues planning staff has identified. Professional planners consider the interrelated effects of policies that cause or influence change in communities. In doing so, they address issues such as comprehensiveness, consistency, and long-term perspective in order to ensure sound analysis and well-formed policy. As a result, planning staff identified the following additional considerations. The first issue is two existing inconsistencies between the noise ordinance and the noise element. Back in 2007, when the noise element was adopted, one of the provisions was to change the allowed hours of construction noise on Saturdays. The previous hours were from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and were to be changed to 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. However, that update was never incorporated into the current noise control ordinance. Staff also observed that the interior noise limits in the noise element and the noise ordinance use different units of measurement and are not equivalent. So staff recommends addressing both of these inconsistencies at this time. The second issue is a code enforcement challenge relating to the noise ordinance's code language about when a noise violation gets triggered. The current code language uses 5 decibels above the actual ambient noise level as the point at which a violation occurs, instead of using the maximum noise standard set in the code. In one case, the neighborhood was very quiet and the actual ambient noise level was very low. This caused the noise from an air conditioner to be a violation, whereas it would have been more practical to use a standard noise level as the basis for triggering a violation. Staff recommends reviewing this code section as well at this time to determine if there is a more practical way it can be written. The final issue is that there may be impacts to additional city policies, documents, and regulations that have not been mentioned in this report. Once staff has the results of the noise studies and has conducted further analysis, staff will be able to identify the impacts to those other documents, and we will return to council with the findings and request further direction. So to conclude, staff is seeking direction from council on 3 items. The first is whether council wishes to pursue the potential code revisions. To do so would involve staff issuing a request for proposals and contracting with a consultant to conduct the noise studies and analysis of potential code revisions. Staff would do so using existing community development budget, and at this time we anticipate the studies to cost up to $10,000. If council does decide to move forward with the code studies, the second item we would need direction on is which days and times we should study for potentially extending the allowed hours of operation of amplified sound equipment. As I mentioned, the current limitation for commercial uses is 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Saturday, with no use allowed on Sundays or legal holidays. Staff recommends maintaining the current Sunday through Wednesday and holiday limitations. Council may wish to consider changing the hours on Friday or Saturday, which is consistent with other cities we looked at, or council could also consider including Thursday. I'll provide some examples of timeframes council could direct staff to study, although, of course, council may direct us to study any other timeframe. So the first example is to extend the hours on Friday and Saturday to allow the use of amplified sound equipment until midnight instead of 10 p.m. The second example is to extend the hours on Friday and Saturday to allow the use of amplified sound equipment until 2 a.m. instead of 10 p.m. 2 a.m. is the typical time that alcohol service ends, but one caution with extending the hours until 2 a.m. on Saturday night is that doing so will actually change the allowed hours on Sunday, since 2 a.m. would actually be Sunday morning rather than Saturday night. The third example is to extend the hours on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday until midnight instead of 10 p.m. And the fourth example is to extend the hours on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday until 2 a.m. instead of 10 p.m. As a note, in choosing the timeframes to study, Council is not committing to extending the allowed hours of operation of amplified sound equipment during these times. The noise study results will provide information to Council to help make that final decision. It may be better to be more broad and include a wider timeframe to study so that more data is available. Council can always limit the final allowed timeframe once there is data to evaluate. And then last on the slide, the final item that staff hopes to receive direction on is whether you wish for us to address the existing code inconsistencies mentioned earlier relating to the allowed hours of construction noise, the interior noise standards, and the code enforcement issue regarding noise standards that trigger a violation. So that concludes my presentation. We look forward to receiving your direction, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Agajanian?
Just if I have to start, that if you have to study, in my opinion, it's better to study Thursday, Friday, Saturday until 2 a.m. of following day, and then if we have to decide, we will decide later whether we want to keep it that way or to limit it to 12 a.m. If you don't study, then you can't answer the question if what will happen if you extend to 2 a.m. But if you did that far, so maybe it will be easier to decide on other options. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Ms. Devine?
I agree with Councilmember Agajanian. I think in order to make a good decision, I think we have to have all of those days and hours studied, even though I'm opposed to 2 a.m. on Thursday or Sunday. But I think it benefits us to do the complete study now. Yes, hire the consultant, of course, and address the existing code inconsistencies. I do want to say that I don't want to see any changes in the residential noise control ordinance. I think most people are happy with those, but I would like for us to look at the work hours and that have been, I guess, changed from 9 a.m. to 5 to 7 to 7. Maybe take a look at those. Otherwise, that's the way I look at this. The more information we have on a decision like this, the better.
Thank you.
Mr. Quintero?
I'll be quick. I agree with Ms. Devine and Mr. Agajanian. Could I ask a quick question? I'm curious. For instance, Giggles, that's been there for such a long time, what time do they close? 12 or 2?
On weekends, we believe they close at 2 a.m.
Or at least they stop alcohol service at 2 a.m.
Right.
In something that Councilwoman Devine said, being as broad as possible, if we study Thursday to Saturday into Sunday at 2 a.m., that would be then your scope of ability to change. If you have any desire to see it, say, Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, you could do that. Then direct us for those as well. If you think you want to keep it to Thursday to Saturday or into Sunday morning, then we'll take that direction as well.
Okay, I am in agreement with my colleagues. My only questions are, the amplified music is inside, correct? Or is it anywhere? It can be anywhere on the property?
Not
Anywhere on
necessarily.
the property. And typically, it's outside when you experience the problem.
Correct.
How about the, who's that rhinestone cowboy at the corner of Brand and Broadway? with his little amplifier there? How does he fall under all this?
Should be at to no later than 10 PM. If he has an amplified sound permit, it would be till 10 PM. If he's playing at 11 o'clock, I don't have code enforcement here, so somebody could call Glendale PD and they would go out and enforce.
And so how would they study this if we go to 2 AM? Are they going to let a few venues play until 2 and see what sort of complaints they get? Or how are they going to do that? Or just see how quiet it is, the ambient sound until 2 AM?
What you mentioned there at the end, that's what we want as the baseline. Basically, what we found is that whatever that ambient sound is for that time and that day, we could potentially go up to 15 decibels above that. So what we're trying to do is establish that baseline. And yes, we would go out there on a Thursday night and a Friday night, and we would test that ambient sound. And hopefully on an evening when there is an activity at, say, one of the establishments there. We will also go to the nearby residential buildings that directly abut that and also take measurements from there to better understand the impacts that they might receive.
Okay. And with that, okay, Ms. Devine?
I just wanted to know, have we ever had complaints about concerning events that we've had in the evening, like the soccer tournaments or the World Cup in the Artsakh Plaza?
Not for our events, you know, we just had cruise night, and I don't think anybody has ever complained about it. And I'll be honest, some of the complaints were really geared towards, there was other motivations for it. Well, you know, I could stop complaining if I get dinner at your establishment every Thursday night, something like that. But it's a legitimate concern, and what we're trying to do is balance that promotion of a vibrant downtown where we've set up in our art and entertainment district that we want people doing things late into the evening. We want to balance that with the residents that live in, albeit in an urban area, but still, we don't want to go overboard. So we're looking for that balance. As Bradley said, we set a baseline. That will give us a lot of information on which direction we go.
So let me just be clear about the current ordinance. Till 10 o'clock, and after 10 o'clock, there's no amplified music permitted?
Not by code.
Not by code.
Not by code.
I mean, I'm thinking of the old Jacks, okay, which, you know, the music was very much contained in the interior of the building, and probably none of it spilled out into the street, and they probably went till midnight, let's say, with the, you know, the type of music, although amplified, was jazz and not really cacophonous. But go to another club, maybe like Giggles, where they've got dance, Latino dance. Is that what you go there for? Or salsa night? And it's, you know, it's a different type of, I mean, the music would spill out, I think, a little more easily on a Giggles type, or I don't know who else is on there that has amplified music along that stretch, but.
Our experience.
Like Chess Park. Chess Park has amplified music, and it's completely out in the open. So
Eat it on verandas, Mr. Mayor,
even on the roof,
on the
right?
rooftop.
Right.
That's correct.
And typically in places like Giggles, they're configured in such a way that the music may spill. If it does spill out, it's not very audible. The noise that you typically get to complain about is people coming and going. That's not amplified. They're just talking. They had fun. They're laughing and doing whatever.
And then how do we enforce it? I mean, someone calls and says they're too loud. Would this ordinance measure decibels, or would it measure absolute time limits where it has to stop, and the police could easily enforce that, saying, well, it's 12:30, we had a 12 o'clock deadline, obviously you're in violation, as opposed to you're too loud, and, you know, no, I'm not, yes, you are, and, you know, how do they, I guess there needs to be an enforcement. As we go forward, let's sort of clarify an enforcement, because I don't want to create a ordinance that the police can't enforce, or that, you know, they'll have to have too much subjective judgment. It should be more objective in terms of decibels or time or whatever.
Correct, and we will be working with the chief, with police, to make sure that, to maintain their ability to enforce this, but also for us to try to put something in here that is measurable, is objective. And in terms of your question, it could be time and it could be decibel. Because even if they're operating within that time frame, they're still constrained by a certain decibel level that they can't exceed. They're not allowed to just blow that out of the water.
And I would add that it's not only will we work with PD, we already have, so they're cued into that and have given us their suggestions on, somebody rolls up, how do we enforce this? So we're working closely with them on that.
I think the outdoor venues are going to be more problematic as we get more development and so forth. I think that's what affects neighboring businesses, or even if they abut residential zones.
Okay, I think we've provided some direction to staff on this. Is that clear where we're at?
Correct, thank you.
I'll take a motion.
Move the item?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Agajanian,
Yes.
Devine,
Yes.
Garpetian, Quintero,
Yes.
Mayor Najarian.
Yes. Next item, I think, is off the agenda, but it's a special presentation. Is that,
Is this
True.
for the award, Mr. Mayor?
yes, the award.
Oh, we're ready to go with the award.
I can tell everyone's just jumping right up.
Yes, we're ready to go, sir.
No particular presentation, but I'm going to ask my trusty assistant, Philip Lanzafame, here to bring this up.
Oh, that's nice.
We just wanted to take a moment, and the fact that I wrote notes should signify how important it is. I never come up here with notes, but I came up with something prepared. Typically, when we come here, council is providing awards and commendations for our excellent citizens, our youth, and their accomplishments. But through this DSP process, back in June, the City of Glendale was recognized for the work on the Downtown Specific Plan by the Los Angeles chapter of the American Planning Association. They host an awards gala every year. We were actually given the comprehensive plan in a large jurisdiction, so that means that we beat out cities like Los Angeles, Long Beach, others, for the work that was done. Through this process, we were able to achieve a lot of things. Through the council's vision, your goals of trying to improve livability, to improve outdoor space, to improve design, to improve all of these things. I lost my couple staff members here that were working with us on it. They had to get back for some meetings, but we were extremely appreciative of your vision, your guidance, your willingness to explore a lot of these newer concepts that we ended up considering and deploying. For myself, it was a pleasure to find myself in the deep end of the pool right out of the gate. I think we've talked about this before. Housing moratorium are some of the scariest words for a planner, but this was a really exciting experience to be involved in, and it was a great opportunity to reimagine this and to be involved in that coming right out of the gate. You've really navigated some
Damn right. You're damn right, Bradley. You're damn right. Keep going.
There's more.
Would you like us to do this with a larger audience?
See, we should have done it on that night before. You navigated some really critical, important decision elements, and we did it in a very short period of time. I've worked on projects like this before. It took us 5-7 years to do it. We did it in 5 months. So, and that is through your vision, the fact that you guys really came down hard with this and worked hard with it, and were very receptive to new ideas. So, I'm just here to offer this nice piece of jewelry, I guess you could call it, or flair to add to City Hall. And it was a pleasure to work on this with the council.
I told you so. I told you so, that the moratorium was nothing to be afraid about, but it was an opportunity to highlight the talents of your planning staff and to move forward with something that the entire, is this countywide or is this statewide or nationwide?
This is regionally.
Southern California.
Region-wide, that we could be very proud of. Seriously. I'm serious. I know you guys were afraid. The previous city manager was afraid.
He wasn't here when we got the award.
But he was afraid. We tried to pass it, and he was, no, you can't do that, giving me all sorts of grief. But I'm very glad we did it. It did result in a much better series of building standards for the city, and it really sharpened up the minds of your planning staff, Phil. So it's something you should all be very proud of.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for the challenge. I am very proud of the planning staff. Bradley talked about the time frame that we did this, and that was something that it scared me, and they all said, challenge accepted, and they stepped up. Bradley Calvert led this, Vilia Zematitis, Chris Agardi. We had folks from traffic and in our mobility planning, Fred Zovran, all working very hard on this. And I am very proud of the staff. I'm very proud of this council for creating the vision that you wanted to see and taking the document. And you did. You forced us to take a look at something that we've now committed to look at quite frequently. So thank you very much. And I'd like to present this to you, Mr. Mayor, and if I can come up and present it to you and share it with the council.
Why are we doing this on like,
Should be at
when we
night.
had the packed house yesterday or last month for the water and power issue? Thank you, I'm very glad. Good job, you guys. Okay,
And-
would anyone like to lay it on?
Yes, I would. I definitely would.
Ms.
You know,
Devine.
let's give credit where credit is due. I mean, thank you, Bradley and staff. And, you know, when you say that this could be a 7-year project and you did it in 5, and you brought new ideas and a vision that this council needed to see, wanted to see, and was very exciting to see. And so we thank you, Phil, and your staff, Bradley, and all of, and Vilia, and everyone that was associated with this this project. You know, well-deserved credit. Thank you.
If there's nothing else, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
We are adjourned.